My program is called Launching by Choice because you have a choice of how you want to launch. And you can pick any piece of part of anybody's launch. Like, oh, I want to do that and I want to use that and I want to take a piece of this. And then you kind of build it out to be your own kind of launch.
All right, Ken, thank you so much for hopping on. I am so excited to dive in. I know I was on your podcast a while back, and I don't know why we didn't talk about you coming over here on mine, but I am so excited to have you here now because I know launching is one of those things that for my clients who are in business that can feel really overwhelming and can really feel daunting and feel like, oh my gosh, how do I launch, right? When we see all these big people doing all these crazy things and launching, like we can get overwhelmed. And so I know you have such a streamlined, simplified way to make launching fun and easy and make it feel light and feel like something that empowers you in your business instead of feeling heavy. So I'm so excited to have you come on and share with my clients and my audience and just be here. And I know we said before, we're like, we'll probably just chit chat and we'll have no problem just chit chatting. So anyway, thank you so much.
Well, thank you. That was really some kind words from you. And yeah, I don't know why we didn't talk about it, when you were on my podcast, but here we are. We did it.
Here we are. Well, I think that's what happens where like you and I are both in the same mastermind kind of space together. And so when we are in these circles together, we're like, why don't we just collaborate? Why don't we connect? And just saying that out loud, like those of you that are listening, if you don't have a mastermind or some sort of community where you're able to connect and collaborate with other people, like that would be my number one thing to do in business. I will never, ever go without having some sort of community because you just connect and you meet other people and then you help each other and support each other and you learn from each other and it just makes it much more fun. So anyway, whole other tangent side story. Ken, thank you so much. Would you mind, those of you that are, for those that don't know you, would you mind just sharing a little bit about your story? Why and how did you get to this place about launching? Like why launching? Why helping other people launch? Why do you love launching when so many people like hate launching? Why do you love launching?
Well, we can start off by first saying that I'm from Norway, so we're pretty far apart.
Yeah.
And I live, with my wife and I have 2 kids and we have 3 cats, which, it's nice to have cats, but sometimes it's so much cat hair everywhere and they want to go in, they want to go out. We don't have a cat door. So yeah, but that's.
I hear you.
Yeah, I like cats.
And cats are kind of moody.
They can be moody. Sometimes they want to really cuddle with you, and sometimes they really don't want to. But
yeah, we have one cat, and when you pet her, she's like purring and purring. She's all nice, and it literally just out of the blue, she'll turn and just latch on, and she like bites your hand, and you're like, "Well, thank you. I thought we were in a good mood right now." But
exactly. Anyway. But yeah, no, I love launching. It's, I started out with web and graphic design like 8 years ago. And then I kind of segued through some conversion optimization because I found that interesting, working with the data and, tweaking things. Then I ended up with email marketing at some point, which was really interesting too, because that was a little bit more tangible than, designing things. But I still find that interesting, by the way. But then I suddenly figured out, that I was actually helping my clients actually put together a launch and start to like set up this list with, what do I really want to do? So here's the things that I want to do. This is the things that I don't want to do. And then that kind of led me into launching for some reason. And then that just guided, I was like, let the intuition guide me. Not like, where do I want to go? What do I want to do? That was like the beginning of this whole James Wedmore woo kind of thing, or however you want to go with that. But it has served me well, to be honest, to just kind of go with that intuition, just listening to what I really want to do instead of trying to listen into what everyone is telling you to do, But yeah, launching has been fun. I love just putting things together and, helping people launch. And what I do see is, like we just talked about, it's overcomplicating things, think that you have to do so much, but I love to simplify things. And sometimes I have to kind of stop myself as well. Just earlier this week, I was thinking about this, or last week, actually, I was thinking about it, I'm starting to overcomplicate things like, oh, okay, hold on, Ken, you got to slow down. How can you make this simple, easy? You don't want to overdo it because you don't have to. That's the thing. You don't really have to do all of the things that we see people doing. Like James Wedmore, he does all the things, but he's been doing this for how many years? 10 years, 15 years, and he has a big team. and he's done it a lot of times, obviously. So he has a lot of background to do it, you know? So,
Mm-hmm.
and we don't necessarily.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I would love to know right out of the gate, what is your thoughts and feelings on launching versus doing something more in that evergreen space? So, like, what are the advantages and what are the benefits? So, like, somebody that's listening, they're like, I don't really want to launch. I don't know that I really want to lean into this. Like, what are some of those big benefits and things that you see in why people should launch over building and doing things other ways, which everybody has, like, there's benefits to all of it, right? And like sometimes having components of it in different aspects of our business is beneficial, like having some evergreen component and having some live launch and like all these things. So not to diss on one or the other or say one is better than the other, but like, what are those big benefits that you see in terms of why launching is so powerful for somebody in business, and not just in like the James Wedmore status of the online world, but those people that maybe have no list, they have nothing built out, like they have nothing. They're like starting at ground zero and like wanting to build this business. Why look at launching?
Well, first of all, I would like to say that evergreen is a form of launching as well, because you are more or less constantly in a launch that just kind of flows a little bit different than putting together everything and then putting it out there and doing it for a couple of days and then shut it down. But it's still kind of a launch.
Yeah.
But I would say, you know, to do an evergreen, I would like to say that it's a good idea to maybe do a normal launch just to kind of get a feel of what that looks like. And not to mention that you actually are able to build your list like really effectively, because you're putting all that energy into that one launch and you're getting people interested in, you know, whatever it is that you're doing right there and then. And that kind of helps you kind of build that audience if you don't have an email list. If you're trying to do evergreen and you don't have an email list, you don't really have an idea of how is this going to work out? You know, how is this going to play out? You can't just put a webinar out there and just hope that, okay, we'll do some ads, you know, when they come to the webinar, and then they will just sign up for whatever it is. You know, it could happen. I'm not saying it doesn't, but chances are you're going to struggle a little bit because you have no idea, you know, where in this funnel is something not working, basically. So I would suggest, you know, do a couple launches and do them live and do them often, fail, do mistakes, you know. If you plan on putting a webinar on an evergreen funnel, I would do them weekly and do them manually and live with the audience so you can get a feel of how they respond to, you know, your content, whatever you're teaching, the sales pitch in itself, all of those components. So you really have the finger on the pulse, basically. I would say that's the benefit of actually doing a launch.
Yeah, you highlighted a couple of things in there that I feel like why I love launching is I think one, it builds my list, like guaranteed in any launch that I've done, all of them, I've built tons of followers on Instagram. I've added tons of leads to my email list. I've added like my growth has been so powerful in those phases. You can look, like, I bet you if you took a snapshot of like all of if we could get the metrics for like the last like 3 years, you could probably, you could probably tell where I launched, you know, like just based off of number and growth of like followers and all of that, I think is huge. I also feel like you highlighted too, like the energy. It is so much more different when you create a community or like create an event that people get all hyped up and excited about. Changes the game, I think, even in conversions, right? I think, and I don't know, you could probably give more info on that, but like evergreens is much more difficult to convert than like a live launch for that one reason. Like just the pure energy and the excitement and the connection that you build with those people in that live sort of experience that they don't feel or they don't get when they feel like they're just being put through a funnel sequence that I think makes such a huge difference as well. So I feel like those are two pieces, like for me, particularly when I launch, I love that. I love the energy. I love the community. I love the excitement around this whole big thing and like seeing the growth at one point and then being able to like, particularly for me being a woman and doing it around my cycle and doing it around the way my body's rhythms are, to be able to put so much energy in and then to be able to take my gas off the throttle, like to be able to go all in and then take some gas off, you know, to have that element of like pushing really hard and then pulling back, though for me has been huge.
And I think what we're seeing is that a lot of people are starting to like take on this evergreen style of things, but it doesn't have to be like this super automated thing. It can be like a few manual pieces and places where you actually connect with your audience at some level as well. And I think we're starting to see like a combination of them. And I personally, I do prefer that have like this evergreen part of the launch where you kind of, things are always open. You can always join. You can, you do this like a weekly thing, and then you can also combine it with having this quarterly launch where you really bring in the big guns and you really put on a show and like do this red carpet event kind of a thing. Because that's kind of how I see launches. It's kind of like a movie premiere, you're building up the launch runway. For those who don't know that's like the moment the last time you ended your launch to the next launch, that's kind of launch runway. So launch runway, if you look at it as a movie premiere, it's the time that the actors goes on interviews. They're having like this interview tour, talk about the movie. You have billboards, you have teasers, trailers, behind the scenes stuff. All of that is kind of what leading up to the movie, and you're building up that demand and desire for that movie. In this case, your launch. So I like to see it as a red carpet event. That's like your main thing, whether that's a webinar, workshop, challenge, whatever it is. Like you want to create that experience around your launch in the same way they do it with movie premieres.
I love that. Well, and you and I probably could chat more because I would love to add more evergreen into my stuff. So we'll definitely chat that, because it sounds like you're in love with evergreen too. Yeah. So what would you say as somebody that's like hasn't done anything yet, or maybe is in that earlier stages of launching? Maybe they've done a couple launches and they're just trying to get things kind of smoothened out and evened out. What would you say are the must-haves for every launch?
Well, the must-have is you got to have a place to promote whatever it is that you're doing. You need to have a place, whether that is an email list or it's a social media platform or something like that. You need a place to reach out to people and have them connect with you, see your stuff, get to know you, build that know, like, trust factor. So that's like the first thing. And then obviously you need a way to build that list so you can capture those leads, which probably would be an email list, most likely, or it could be a Facebook group as well, maybe. And then lastly, you need somehow to sell it. And that would be your events, basically. And that's stuff you have to at least do that, but obviously, and there's a but, it's also important to don't forget about the basics. So going back to like the messaging, how do I speak to people? How do I communicate with them? Do I show them that I understand the problems that they're going through? And do I show them that I can help them solve this problem? And then obviously the offer as well, it needs to be irresistible. It needs to be $1 million offer. And you need to feel like this is an offer that I love, that I want to put out into the world. But at the same time, it needs to be like a combination of that problem they want to have solved, but it also needs to be a problem that you want to solve. If that makes sense. So it needs to kind of connect on both sides. So I think those are probably the two most key important, but obviously, as we talked about before, having the energy of it all. I mean, if you can't stand behind your message and you don't believe in it, no one else is going to believe in it. And if you don't love your offer and you really don't feel like this is it, then who else is going to love your offer? No one's going to buy it.
Yeah.
So there's a combination of those three things I feel like is super important. And that's like the three key elements to any launch, to be honest.
Yeah, 100%. And I know so you and I both work with James Wedmore, and this last year I was selected. Thank you to all of you guys in the Next Level group that was selected as one of the breakthrough of the year. And that was my big message, was when you get into alignment with what you're offering and what you're doing and how you're showing up. So who you're serving, what you're offering, and how you're doing it. When you're in alignment with those three things, that's when I really do think you become unstoppable. And I do think like there are a lot of people out there putting out offers. Like you and I just talked about, like your journey was changing and pivoting what you were doing. And mine's been the same way. And that it's once you find that thing that your audience needs, that you love to serve, and you love the way you're doing it, that's when the game becomes unstoppable. Like things change and shift. And so like that was my whole message for the breakthrough of the year. And that's what you just said too. Same thing. Like when you are aligned with serving and providing something that your audience needs, right? Or what they want, not what they want, not what they need, but what they want. And that you're doing it in a way that feels good and in alignment with you and all of that. Like that is where the magic happens. And that's where things really, I think, and you could correct me if I'm wrong, but like, I think at some point we overcomplicate by thinking that there's one right way to do things, that there's one right way to offer it, or we have to launch it a certain way. And that we place the magic in those strategies or in those tools, when really the magic comes back to that alignment piece. And really I feel like I could sell my offer any different way, like any different method, like whether it be a live launch or a webinar or evergreen or whatever, like I could do it in any of those different ways, because I've found that thing that matches with my audience and that lights me up, versus feeling like it's the other way around, that we have to find that launch strategy or find that launch tool or that mechanism, that's going to be the thing that makes the breaks, whether or not it's successful.
Yeah, I 100% agree. And, my program is called Launching by Choice, because you have a choice of how you want to launch. And you can pick any piece of part of anybody's launch. Like, oh, I want to do that, and I want to use that, and I want to take a piece of this. And then you kind of build it out to be your own kind of launch, because you don't have to do, what anybody else is telling you to do. Like I just talked about in the beginning, you can really just take anything that you want and what feels right for you, because that is so much more important, because then you kind of bring in that energy of you being excited about it, instead of, I have to do a webinar. I hate webinars. I don't really want to do webinars, and that brings a whole different type of energy that you don't want to have in your launch.
Yeah.
So it's a matter of just picking out the pieces that you want to use. And there's really nothing that doesn't work. Everybody's going to say like email is dead or webinars are dead. This, challenge is the new thing, but everybody's going to say that this works and that works. So it all works. And we've seen it proven over and over again, so it's just a matter of figuring out what do you want to do.
Yeah.
Sure, it might be old. I mean, webinars have been around forever, but it still works, And one last thing I'm going to point out too is, if you start with like the messaging and offer, but if you also think about how you speak to that one person, just trying to figure out who is that one person, what are they thinking? What are they feeling, saying, doing? If you can pinpoint that, take that into the messaging. And once you dialed in that messaging, you use that to build out your offer. Anything you do after that, it doesn't matter, because you nail down the foundation of your business, of your launch, and then you can do anything. You can literally do anything, just like you said.
No, I think it makes such a huge difference when you dial those core pieces in. And I think oftentimes we're placing the emphasis on the other end, like, right? We're placing it on the front end versus like the offer and the message in the back end. And when we nail those down, the other pieces doesn't matter. It doesn't matter.
It doesn't.
Yeah. Yeah.
But to that point though, messaging is like this evolving, changing thing that really doesn't stay the same, because you change and you evolve and you learn new things. And like when I started, it was really tactics, strategies, all of that stuff. And then suddenly I learned about energy. It's like, oh, this is interesting. Okay, cool. And then I kind of went with that and kind of like pivoted a little bit, and changed it up. So, my message has changed over the years as well, but that's okay, because it would never be perfect, but just let it grow, let it be what it is. And every time you're going to say like, oh yeah, now my messaging on point, but you're going to say that so many times, but it feels like that, you're getting closer and closer every single time. Yeah. The target keeps moving.
Well, okay. So my next question was going to be like, what are those big mistakes that you see people making when it comes to launching? And I think you just highlighted on that. Like for me, I think one of the biggest things I've learned is to embrace the fact that it will never be perfect, that it's always evolving and that it's always growing. And I think for me, there was this element of like almost forcing myself, either putting it off, waiting for it to feel perfect, or putting it out there and then feeling like it flopped because it wasn't perfect, rather than just embracing the idea that it's going to be imperfect each time and that you'll never reach a level of like complete perfection. Like it's always going to evolve, right? Like even to like James Wedmore still continues to evolve it. Yeah. Like, so even at $10 million launches, he's continuing to evolve every single time, right? And to embrace that mentality that it is always evolving, it's always changing, it's always growing, and that you will never reach that final kind of place. I think for me, I think that was a big mistake I was making, and a big mistake I see a lot of other entrepreneurs in is kind of waiting and wanting to map it all out. And I know you highlighted at the beginning too, like that sense of like launch, like with a webinar, like over and over and over and over again. Like the more times you do it, the more clear you get on your message and the more clear you get with what's landing and what's not. And it helps you almost like fail forward faster. So
Yep.
what would be other than like that, maybe that, or you can highlight on that, but like, what would be some of those other mistakes that you see people making when it comes to launching?
Well, you definitely hit the nail on that one because I mean, people see mistakes and failures as a bad thing, but it's actually a really good thing because then you really know what didn't work and you can
Mm-hmm.
take that knowledge with you and build out something else or try something else. So I think that's, yeah, that is so on point. But the other thing that I want to say is that people should remember that, launching is a lot about experimenting, testing things out because you literally do not know what's going to work or not always because there's no one size fits all. I'm
Mm-hmm.
going to do something different from you and you're going to do something different from somebody else. And, your audience is going to respond in a different way. You're a different person, the way you say it is different than what I would say,
Mm-hmm.
even though we agree on things, but just seeing launch as a test and an experiment, I think that is super important. And people don't view it as that. They just, it's the thing they need to do. And
Yeah.
if they fail, then that sucks. We're not going to do that again. And then they change up everything. And that's another part, though, as we're talking about it, changing things in a launch.
Yeah.
It's important, to change things up and try new things, but don't scrap everything and start from scratch every single time. Take one thing because then you know how that worked versus the other time.
Yep.
It's all about comparing data, basically comparing the previous launch to this next launch. So if you change too much, then you don't know, was it this or was it that? Was it was it a webinar? Was it the challenge? Well, why didn't it work? So,
and it's so much more work that way.
Oh yeah.
You're doing a whole lot more work when you do it that way.
And that's another thing, you don't have to recreate the wheel every single time either. You have a lot of launch material from last launch, use it again. People don't care. People need to hear things like 7 times, 14 times, I don't know, plenty, before it finally clicks. And I'm sure we experienced that all, listening to a podcast or something, and then you re-listen it to like a year later, and it's like, oh, right. Now I get it,
Yeah.
And the same thing is with your launch. And especially, if you change it up a little bit every time you do, and then a year from now, you can use the same thing that you did a year ago and nobody will remember it. And maybe you even tweak it a little bit, make it a little better because you improved as well. But yeah, that's another thing.
Yeah. No, I agree. I think like repurposing and reusing is huge. And I think for me particularly, so I teach my clients all about using their menstrual cycle, right? So I talk about like mapping things out based on where your cycle's at and like how do you map out the things you have to do in your launch based on like video recording. We're going to do that here. We're going to actually schedule your launch here. Like all of those types of things to make it, I'm not really teaching the launch strategy or the mechanisms, but like when you take your to-do list and you know where you have what you have to do, let's map that with where your cycle's at. And each time you do that, you can refine and enhance those different pieces. So, your first one there might be some tasks that you're doing out of alignment with your cycle. Like you just have to get them done based on that's where you're at. But then the next time you launch that, then you come back to it with the base of it already done. And now we just get to enhance it with the energy of where your cycle's at. And then it just keeps elevating each and every single time. And I think for me, that was a hard lesson I had to learn was not reinventing the wheel over and over. And I think that comes from this place of we've been taught that hard work equals success. And so when it starts to feel easy, when it starts to feel light, is when we start complicating it because we're like, wait, hard work. I have to be working hard for it to be successful. When in reality, when it starts to feel easy and light, that's actually the end goal. Like that's what we want it to feel like, right? Is there anything else that you feel like we've missed during this conversation? I loved it. And I think, launching is definitely, there's a friend of mine who was asking, he's like, do you actually like launching? And I was like, I love launching. I love the energy of it. And I hope to kind of increase it a little bit more this year, just getting that rhythm down. But I love it. And I know a lot of people don't. So I've loved this conversation to bring some of that positive vibe and energy to launching.
Yeah. And I think a lot of reasons because why people don't love it is because trying to do things they don't want to do. It's things that is out of alignment. So like I said, if you could, what would your launch look like if you really just did exactly the way you wanted to do? There's tons of ways you can do it. And you can launch just by using emails. You can do that. People have done it successfully. So do you have to go on social media and do you have to have a webinar? No, of course not.
Yeah.
I think if people just sit down and think, okay, how can I do this the simplest way where I do feel like it's fun and it's in line with me and it's the way I want to do it, instead of trying to look at, what your experts are doing, the gurus, everybody else out there, then I think you're going to find it's going to be a lot easier and a lot more fun. And, all the things that we talked about, looking at it as an experiment, testing things out, having fun with it, being curious, just don't see mistakes as failures. It's just something to learn from. There's lessons there. If you do all of these things, I think it's going to be a lot easier.
Yeah. And just the mindset too of like you said, like, this is fun. This is easy. I'm learning. I'm experimenting. Like that is going to be the biggest thing for so many people. So I know you talked about your program Launch by Choice, correct?
Launch by Choice, yeah.
Launch by Choice. How can somebody get more information on that, follow you, get connected with you, all of those types of fun things?
Well, if they want to find out more about Launching by Choice, they can go to kenwestgaard.com/collective. They can learn more about that there. Other than that, I do have podcasts like we talked about, the Oh My God, I'm Launching podcast. A lot of great guests like Renee and others. And we talk a lot about launching, and, we really dig into not the typical 6 and 7-figure launch that we do hear about all the time, but we hear about the 0 sales launches, which is just as important, because there are people out there just like you who are struggling with launches, and there's a lot to learn from it. And if people want to connect with me, they can do so on Instagram at Ken Westgaard.
Perfect. I almost said perfect. I don't know why.
Perfect.
Perfect. I don't know why. It's like weird little things come out, little quirks. Thank you so much for hopping on. This was awesome. And I know I just fully appreciate it. I appreciate you willing to share your expertise and your knowledge. Like I said, it's definitely not an area that I teach. I will teach like where to put different things based on where your cycle's at and how to do like that whole launch with ease in that sense of like your flow and cycle and things like that. But the tactical tangible strategies, I always defer to somebody else, because I know there's so many more people. Like when we hone into our expertise, it's so much more powerful. So I appreciate your willingness to share your expertise. And I hope you have a great day.
Thank you so much, and I appreciate this opportunity.
Yeah.